Jang Sung-taek possessed Kim Jong-un's pleasure squad without permission. His uncle Jang Sung-taek was a playboy.
In most countries, if a government car parked outside a girls' school and officials entered a classroom to inspect the students, it would become a scandal. In accounts from North Korea, it was a scheduled procedure. Teachers were sometimes warned. The girls were often told almost nothing. The officials were looking for teenagers. In some accounts, girls as young as 13 or 14. They were not recruiting for the army. The system became known outside North Korea as a pleasure squad. In Korean, the name usually given is Kippumjo, the Joy Group. There's no public order establishing it and no verified personnel file from Pyongyang. Almost everything known about it comes from defectors, former officials, leadership staff, and women who say they passed through the selection system. Their accounts differ in details, but they repeatedly describe the same structure. Girls selected by physical and political criteria, assigned to serve the leadership in its inner circle, then released under conditions designed to preserve their silence. The system is usually traced to Kim Il-sung and described as expanding under Kim Jong-il. Then, in December 2011, Kim Jong-il died. The obvious question was whether the system died with him. The evidence cannot give us a clean answer, but it can show how the system worked, why a dictatorship would build it, and what happened to the women when the leadership no longer wanted them. It begins with a tape measure. What makes this different from an ordinary story of abuse by a powerful man is the level of organization described by the witnesses. This was not simply a ruler choosing women around him. According to former insiders, selection passed through the same party machinery that screened cooks, drivers, nurses, guards, and housekeepers for sensitive work near the leadership. Some accounts identify a unit commonly translated as Section 5. Others describe the structure differently. No independent documentation allows us to reconstruct the exact chain of command. What the accounts agree on is a function. The women did not reach the leadership by accident. They were screened, classified, and transferred through the state. The first selection often took place at school. A team would arrive under the cover of a talent search, a health inspection, or an unexplained official visit. Girls from a particular class or age group would be told to stand and wait. The first filter was physical. Recruiters reportedly recorded height and examined the face, skin, teeth, and posture. Some accounts say scars, poor eyesight, or visible medical conditions could eliminate a candidate. The measurements vary between witnesses. What matters is that a state official was measuring a child's body to decide whether she was suitable for the ruling household. The second filter had little to do with her appearance. North Korea classifies people according to family background and perceived political reliability. This system, known as Songbun, can determine whether someone lives, studies, and works. A candidate's family had to be considered politically safe, but some accounts suggest recruiters also avoided girls whose parents were powerful enough to create complications. The ideal candidate was loyal but not protected, someone whose family could be rewarded, pressured, or isolated without threatening the people conducting the selection. Young, politically acceptable, physically attractive, and without anyone capable of saying no for her. For the family, the selection might be presented as an honor. Their daughter had been chosen to serve close to the country's highest leadership. Some parents may have believed it. Others understood enough to be afraid. Either way, a party summons could not be safely rejected. Selected girls were reportedly sent to regional or central facilities for further screening. This is where the euphemism stopped working. Former insiders and women describing the process as candidates underwent intimate examinations whose stated purpose was to determine whether they were virgins. No medical examination can prove virginity. The procedure was about control, humiliation, and certification by the state. That detail is why this cannot be explained simply as recruitment for an entertainment troupe. A government does not subject schoolgirls to so-called virginity examinations merely to determine whether they can sing or dance. North Korea ratified the Convention of the Rights of the Child in 1990 and acceded to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in 2001. On paper, it had accepted obligations fundamentally incompatible with the coercion described by these witnesses. Inside the country, paper meant nothing else. It meant the form that moved a girl from one institution to another. Accounts often describe the selected women being divided by assignment. Some were trained as singers and dancers for banquets and private functions. Others were assigned to domestic, medical, or personal service inside leadership residences. A third category, according to repeated testimony, existed to provide sexual access to the ruler and, in some cases, to senior officials he wished to favor. The names and boundaries are uncertain. No independent investigator has verified the structure. What can be said with greater confidence is that women were reportedly graded and assigned, and that the assignment determined what was done to them. They were also made to understand that everything they saw was a state secret, not merely a family embarrassment, a political secret. North Korea has long used collective punishment against families accused of political disloyalty. The exact reach varies, but defectors repeatedly describe relative suffering because of one person's alleged offense. That was a lock on the door. The threat was not limited to the woman. It extended to everyone she had left at home. Our most unusual view inside Kim Jong-il's private world came from a Japanese chef who wrote under the name Kenji Fujimoto. Fujimoto said he worked for Kim Jong-il for around 13 years, beginning in the late 1980s. He cooked for the household, traveled with it, and spent time around Kim's children, including the boy who would later rule as Kim Jong-un. He escaped to Japan in 2001. His account requires caution. He profited from it, sometimes dramatized his role, and later returned to Pyongyang at Kim Jong-un's invitation. But he occupied a position few foreign witnesses ever reached. What he described was less a government than a royal court protected by a modern security state. Private residences most citizens did not know existed. Special trains, imported food, cars, and alcohol brought into a country whose people had recently endured a catastrophic famine. And at private gatherings, groups of young women serving as singers, dancers, and companions. Other witnesses described the same environment from a less protected position. In their accounts, women would be ordered to drink, perform, or accompany the leader's guests. Some describe women being assigned to senior officials as an expression of favor. This is what makes a Kippumjo politically important. The women function as currency. A personal dictatorship cannot survive on ideology alone. It must secure the loyalty of generals, security chiefs, and party officials who possess weapons, information, and access. Their loyalty is maintained through privilege. Apartments in Pyongyang, imported cars, better food, protection for their children, access to hospitals and schools unavailable to ordinary citizens, and, according to the testimony surrounding the Kippumjo, access to people who could not refuse. The abuse was therefore not separate from the political system. It was one of the benefits a system could distribute. The ruler was demonstrating that every privilege in the country, including control over another person, came through him. The forms, measurements, and examinations did not make the violence less personal. They made it scalable. Some former insiders described the women living in guarded facilities with food, clothing, and medical care far beyond what most North Koreans received. The regime could call them privileged. Their families might receive rewards. They were protected from hunger and physical labor. But comfort is not freedom. They cannot choose their assignment or leave. Family contact was controlled. Around the leader and his officials, refusal was not meaningful. Some entered after years of being taught that serving the leader was the highest purpose a citizen could achieve. A teenage girl might initially interpret selection as success. That is not evidence that the system was voluntary. It shows how completely a totalitarian state can shape a child's frame of reference before exploiting her. So what happened when the women became too old for the role? The popular online answer is simple. They were executed because they knew too much. The available testimony does not support routine mass execution. Some women may have been imprisoned or killed, but accounts of discussing retirement more often describe another form of control. Some women were reportedly returned to their home regions. Others were placed in marriages arranged or approved by the state. Former insiders describe husbands drawn from the military, security services, or party bureaucracy. A bodyguard, an officer, a party caterer. Men whose own careers depended on discretion and political reliability. Presented by the regime, such a marriage could look like a compensation. The woman left with material support, a husband of status, and a better apartment. Viewed as a security procedure, it served another purpose. You did not release a witness into ordinary society. You placed her beside a man whose career could be destroyed by what she knew. You surrounded them with colleagues and neighbors trained to report irregularities. You made the interests of her husband, children, and parents dependent on her silence. No prison wall was necessary. Her new life performed the same function. Many were not made to disappear physically. They were processed back into society under conditions that required the disappearance of their own past. A woman could return to her village with the same face and the same name. Her family might see that she was alive. They might see the apartment, the gifts, or the uniform worn by her husband. But the girl who had boarded the train was not permitted to explain where she had gone or what had been done to her. The state took control of her body for several years. Then it attempted to take control of her memory for the rest of her life. That is what "the girls who never came home" means. Not necessarily a mass grave. A woman standing in her own kitchen, required to behave as though a part of her life had never occurred. And this is where the story requires a warning. Reporting from North Korea repeatedly confuses rumor with fact. In 2013, media reported that several North Korean performers had been executed. One alleged victim was Hyung Sung-wol, a prominent singer described, without reliable evidence, as Kim Jong-un's former girlfriend. The story spread worldwide. Firing squad, relatives forced to watch, pornography charges. In May 2014, Hyung Sung-wol appeared on North Korean television. In 2018, she entered South Korea in front of international cameras as part of an Olympic delegation. That is the information environment surrounding the Kippumjo. North Korea permits no independent inspections and releases no authentic staffing records. Domestic witnesses cannot speak freely. Defectors often describe even years later through translators, activists, intelligence services, or media organizations. That does not make their testimony worthless. Without it, much of what the world knows about North Korean prisons, forced labor, and surveillance would remain hidden. But testimony must remain testimony. A detail repeated by 10 websites may still originate with one unnamed source. An unverified report can begin sounding like fact simply because it has survived online for 20 years. So here's the honest ledger. Multiple accounts support a state-organized system for selecting young women to serve the leadership and senior elites. They describe physical screening, political background checks, restricted residence, sexual coercion, and controlled retirement. Several former insiders describe marriages to vetted officials after service. But the exact responsible office remains uncertain. The number of women is unknown. The frequently repeated three-part structure cannot be independently confirmed. Claims that all former members were executed are unsupported. Nor is there reliable evidence that every female performer close to the leadership belonged to the system. That includes Kim Jong-un's wife, Ri Sol-ju. She performed with a state musical ensemble before becoming First Lady. The claim that she belonged to the Kippumjo is speculation. Kim Jong-un did not inherit this world as an outsider. He grew up inside of the leadership household. Fujimoto said he knew him as a boy around his father's residence and private gatherings. When Kim inherited power in 2011, he also inherited the institutions that managed access to the ruling family. In 2012, the regime unveiled the all-female Morambong Band. Its modern clothing and electric instruments were presented as evidence of a new style in Pyongyang. There is no sufficient evidence to identify a band as a continuation of the Kippumjo. Public performance and personal selection by the leader do not prove sexual exploitation. The stronger argument for continuity is structural. In 2015, South Korean media, citing unnamed sources, reported that recruitment had restarted under King Jong-un. The report was widely repeated and never independently verified. But the conditions that made such a system possible did not disappear. North Korea still runs on personal loyalty to the ruling family. Housing, food, travel, and security remain politically distributed. Families are still classified by perceived loyalty. The leadership is still surrounded by institutions designed to supply it with personnel and privilege. There is no public evidence that the apparatus described by defectors was investigated, prosecuted, or dismantled. Whether every old procedure survived is impossible to prove. The machine only needed to preserve the relationship on which a system was built, a leadership entitled to demand, an apparatus trained to supply, and citizens unable to refuse. In 2014, a United Nations Commission of Inquiry concluded that North Korea had committed systematic and widespread abuses, including crimes against humanity. It recommended that the Security Council refer the situation to the International Criminal Court. That referral never happened. China opposed Security Council action, and Russia also resisted, treating the issue as part of the Council's mandate. The abuses were discussed. No path to prosecution was created. Pyongyang is unlikely to open its archives. No domestic court will examine the records, and no independent investigator can enter the former residences. When the women who lived through the system die, much of the evidence will die with them. What remains exists because former officials, household employees, defectors, and women describing their own selection eventually spoke outside North Korea. Their accounts are incomplete. Some details conflict. Some claims may be exaggerated or wrong. Many women never reached a place where speaking was possible. But an incomplete record is not the same as no record. A girl could be measured in a classroom and told that the state had chosen her for an honor. Years later, she might return with an approved husband, a better apartment, and a command never to explain where she had been. The regime could threaten her family. It could erase her from every document that mattered. It could force her to perform an ordinary life over the place where her real one had been buried. But it could not guarantee that every voice would remain silent forever. A few accounts survived. For women who never received an investigation, a trial, or even recognition that the system existed, those accounts are not a complete verdict. They are the closest thing to one they are ever likely to get.